वन फैमिली वन फ्यूचर में पूर्ण रूप से समाहित है।
Hello and welcome. It is 7:30 in the evening in India and we are back again with our spotlight on G20. On the show today, we take a deeper look at the global economic challenges on a day the second G20 Finance and Central Bank Deputies meeting got off the ground today in Bengaluru as a prelude to the first G20 Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting later this week in the Garden City. Also on the show, the first G20 Culture Working Group meeting got underway in the ancient city of Khajuraho in Madhya Pradesh. We will bring you the details of both the meetings and more G20 news. I'm Munmun Bhattacharya. First up, the top stories. Union Minister Anurag Singh Thakur inaugurates a second G20 Finance and Central Bank Deputies meeting in Bengaluru, says India's G20 presidency seeks to actively facilitate pragmatic global solutions to challenges posed by the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, food and energy insecurity, broad-based inflation, heightened debt vulnerabilities, worsening climate change and geopolitical tensions. G20 Finance and Central Bank Deputies to finalize a communique that will be endorsed by G20 Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors on 24th and 25th of February in Bengaluru. Ministers and governors to discuss strengthening multilateral development banks, financing for resilient, inclusive and sustainable cities of tomorrow, leveraging digital public infrastructure for advancing financial inclusion, global economy, global health and international taxation. First G20 Culture Working Group meeting gets underway in the ancient city of Khajuraho in the Indian heartland state of Madhya Pradesh. Union Culture Minister G. Kishan Reddy says the Modi government brought back 229 antiquities to India from overseas. 25 of them will be showcased to the delegates at the meeting. Minister inaugurates exhibition on return of treasures. Students of Khajuraho participate in a 1.5-kilometer run for culture as an exercise in public participation. Under a Y20 engagement group of G20, brainstorming session on shared future, youth and democracy and governance takes place in New Delhi. Entrepreneurs from Delhi NCR region and alumni from overseas pursuing higher education brainstorm on digital India, student-centric governance and policy sector. The second G20 Finance and Central Bank Deputies meeting got off the ground today in Bengaluru. Here's a detailed report on what happened on the first day of the meeting and how this meeting will be a prelude to the first G20 Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting later this week.
The second G20 Finance and Central Bank Deputies meeting started in Garden City, Bengaluru, with the inaugural address by Union Minister for Information and Broadcasting and Youth Affairs and Sports in the Government of India, Anurag Singh Thakur. The meeting is being co-chaired by Secretary in the Department of Economic Affairs in India's Finance Ministry, Ajay Seth, and Dr. Michael D. Patra, Deputy Governor of the RBI. This meeting is a prelude to the first G20 Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors meeting under India's G20 presidency. Addressing the meeting, Union Minister Anurag Singh Thakur said that the finance track is at the core of the G20 process and provides an effective forum for global economic discourse and policy coordination in view of the socio-economic challenges facing the global economy.
The global economy is facing the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, food and energy insecurity, broad-based inflation, heightened debt vulnerabilities, worsening climate change and geopolitical tensions. The impact of all these crises can set back progress on the world's key development priorities. The G20 can make significant contribution to find pragmatic global solution.
He said that in order to address the challenges, G20, IMF, World Bank have initiated work on strengthening multilateral development banks, to meet the shared global challenges of the 21st century. Financing cities of tomorrow, leveraging digital public infrastructure for financial inclusion and productivity gains, and advancing the international taxation agenda.
Towards fulfilling this goal, the G20 finance track discussions in 2023 will include strengthening bilateral development banks to meet the shared global challenges of the 21st century, financing cities of tomorrow, leveraging digital public infrastructure for financing inclusion and productivity gains, and advancing the international taxation agenda, among others. The various work streams in G20 have already initiated work on these key issues. I hope for constructive outcomes across all these issues, and I hope that the needs of the common man remains at the center stage of all policy solutions that all of you will discuss and formulate in your collective wisdom.
In his concluding remarks, the minister highlighted the need to aspire for the spirit of multilateralism, while noting that there are contentious issues and countries need to balance their domestic aspirations to collectively achieve optimal outcomes.
The Indian presidency believes that success lies in our ability to anticipate, prevent and prepare for significant risks to come, and this calls for an inclusive and renewed multilateralism. I urge all of you in this room to aspire to the spirit of multilateralism. I am aware that there are contentious issues and country needs to balance their domestic aspirations. However, I am sure that collectively we can achieve optimal outcomes.
The deputies will finalize a
As for perspective is Professor Sachin Chaturvedi. He is an eminent economist and closely associated with India's G20 presidency. Do we have Professor Chaturvedi with us right now? Right. We'll go across to him in a bit, but before that, let's share with you some more G20 news. The SRCC College of Delhi University hosted a brainstorming workshop in New Delhi today. The workshop is a part of the activities of the Youth 20 engagement group under the overall framework of G20 to engage India's youth in democracy and governance. Secretary in the Ministry of Youth Affairs, Meeta Rajiv Lochan, spoke of the tremendous opportunity that India's young demographic offers for economic growth of the country. She said that in the coming year, the Ministry of Youth Affairs will hold discussions with young people, students, industrialists and scientists from all over the country. Three main topics of brainstorming: Digital India, student-centric governance and policy sector were discussed during the workshop. Entrepreneurs from Delhi NCR region and alumni of the college, who are now startup entrepreneurs, participated in the event. Listen in.
Free-flowing exchange of ideas and information. It's that free-flowing exchange of ideas and innovation that leads to economic growth. There's no one formula for it. Every society, every town every village has to find their own models. There are some things that work, a constant collaboration between industry and academia. That is one of the mechanisms that works. It works very well. Yes, we should do more of it. How can we promote it? The recent University Grants Commission guidelines, they talk about professors of practice. How can we take that forward? How can industry and academia collaborate with each other, not just for teaching and curricula, but for research projects. In fact, when we look at the R&D base for India, we find that it is this kind of collaboration which can lead to much better results.
That was about Youth 20. Let's go back to finance track. Remember, the second meeting of the deputies of the central bank governors and finance ministers has started in Bengaluru. For perspective, we are joined by Professor Sachin Chaturvedi, DGRIS for developing countries, eminent economist, closely associated with India's G20 presidency. Such a pleasure to have you, Professor Chaturvedi, once again. These are several issues that we've discussed in the past. Let's take them up again on strengthening of multilateral development banks particularly. Do you see any sort of a practical roadmap or consensus emerging on this issue?
No, thanks, Munmun, for having me here. The issues are absolutely clear in terms of how MDBs would have to be recapitalized. What are the issues in terms of better global governance of the IFIs, including both the World Bank and the IMF? The share issue is something that is always hanging there. The consensus is very much there. The roadmap is becoming a little more contentious in terms of how we go forward. And this is largely because the issues which have come up, they are quite sort of intertwined. Because if you talk about the IMF shares or you talk about strengthening of MDBs, largely in the global context, you immediately get into issues which are related to the global debt crisis. And as all of us know, almost 75 countries are facing huge global debt crisis, and they are largely in the global south. So what India has done has opened a much larger conversation on 12th of January with the global south. And this is something that Prime Minister himself has initiated in terms of conversations with several countries of the global south, including these countries which are facing this challenge. The challenge, we should also not forget that almost one-third of the G7 economy is facing a sort of recession. Officially, of course, there is no declaration of a recession per se, but that challenge is deepening. So MDBs, you are absolutely right. That's a priority area. Consensus is very much there. We are just trying to see how best we can work out the roadmap towards it.
The developing world requires more finance from the multilateral development banks, and hence the case for reform also that you referred to. They require more finance for sustainable development, for meeting climate finance needs, and also for financing sustainable cities of tomorrow. That's another imponderable of the finance track. What sort of forward movement can we expect?
I think three sort of developments are very, very important that we can think of. Within the urban landscapes, the financing of urban infrastructure is something that almost all the multilateral financial institutions are likely to have a sort of converged opinion. They are likely to have some broad understanding in terms of how resilient infrastructure in urban areas would be supported. So that's number one. Number two would be in terms of how the green funds are to be leveraged. We just saw some experience in India with municipal bonds in Indore. The green bonds are 3 times more subscribed. So I think that all is something which is important in terms of how the global guidelines on the way we classify green bonds is something that is likely to happen. Third, Munmun, which is important, is not only in terms of how we look at the consensus emerging for resilient urban infrastructure, but also in terms of how we avoid fragmentation of funds which are available, the capital which is available, the financial fragmentation that we are seeing. So there, a sort of global governance of that, I'm sure G20 would be able to provide some leadership on the finance track.
Yesterday, in a historic move, we saw a linkage between Pay Now of Singapore and India's UPI. How can the G20 meetings take such cross-border fintech connectivity forward? That's another imponderable.
One thing that Munmun is being tried is to explore that the cyber security of such transactions is viewed as sacrosanct. Any efforts to get into that to adversely affect payment architectures, to penetrate and create disruption should be seen as global crime and crime against security of a nation. So this discussion is extremely serious. There are growing efforts by many countries to come up with CBDC and global digital currencies. So more and more participation by emerging economies, by developing countries, they are important. So from that point of view, the Board for International Settlements, the global financial stability frameworks, they would have to see how best the criteria, the norms, they are defined. And from that point of view, I think the first meeting in Bangalore itself would help us move forward. And what we have achieved with Singapore, and now more efforts to have rupee payments across several African countries and in our own neighborhood in South Asia. They are important steps for people for transferring remittances. India is the largest remittance receiver, and almost 5.7% of it comes from Singapore. We have achieved that. Even it is beneficial, Munmun, for Bangladesh, for Nepal, for Bhutan, where people are getting remittances from India. So it is not about Indians getting it from outside. It is also those who are working in India and getting it back at home on such a low cost. So our idea is to reduce the transaction cost, reduce cost of conversion from one currency to another, and this is something which is going to create huge wonders with our financial architecture in the global south.
Another issue on which policy perspectives are expected to be exchanged is the issue of crypto asset regulation. A country like India doesn't currently have a regulatory framework, whereas another country, say like Japan, has one. And there are three issues I understand that are of importance here. One is of financial stability, the second is of user protection, and the third one of linkage to anti-money laundering provisions and countering of terror financing. What can we expect going forward?
It would be a very difficult proposition, Munmun. As we know, there is no consensus on this. Indonesian presidency of G20 ensured that something comes up. In fact, during the presidency itself, Indonesia became one of the first countries in Asia to impose tax on crypto assets, and this has something to convey. The point is that there is de facto recognition of this activity, and that's how you impose tax. In India, the perspectives are polarized. You know the view of RBI. They are of the view that this should be banned completely. The finance minister has taken a view in terms of how we cope up and how do we coordinate, how do we choreograph if at all ban is to be done. Because many countries are recognizing, they are pushing for that, despite the fact that they realize that tracking of crypto assets is next to impossible. It has its own technological challenges. So how do we bring that balance is something that is there. I'm sure one meeting is not sufficient to take a call on this, but definitely over next 2 or 3 meetings, we may see a roadmap coming up, balancing the two polarized perspectives on crypto assets.
Another issue is of leveraging digital public infrastructure for advancing financial inclusion, but this issue we've discussed many times over on the show, India at G20. So we'll leave it at that. Professor Chaturvedi, thank you so much for joining us with your views.
Thank you.
The first G20 Culture Working Group meeting got underway in the ancient city of Khajuraho in Madhya Pradesh. Union Culture Minister G. Kishan Reddy said on the occasion that the Modi government brought back 229 antiquities to India from overseas. 25 of them will be showcased to the delegates at the meeting. An exhibition on return of treasures was also inaugurated on the first day of the 4-day meeting. Students of Khajuraho participated in a 1.5-kilometer run for culture. This was an exercise of public participation. Here's more.
The first G20 Culture Working Group meeting began in Khajuraho, a popular tourist destination in the Indian heartland state of Madhya Pradesh. Delegates were welcomed upon their arrival at the Khajuraho airport with traditional folk performance, Badhai and Rai. In the morning, in the spirit of Jan Bhagidari or public participation, students of Khajuraho participated in a 5-kilometer run for culture. Union Culture Minister G. Kishan Reddy, Union Social and Justice and Empowerment Minister Dr. Virendra Kumar and Khajuraho MP Vishnu Dutt Sharma addressed a press conference on the first day of the 4-day meeting. With protection and restitution of cultural property identified as a key focus area of the meeting, G. Kishan Reddy spoke on how the Narendra Modi government in India brought back 229 antiques from overseas 25 of which will be showcased to delegates.
8 साल में 229 एंटिक्विटीज भारत लाए विदेशों से, 229। आजाद से लेके 14 तक 13 था। अभी इस 8 साल में प्रधानमंत्री जी के प्रयास के कारण, प्रधानमंत्री अलग अलग देशों के साथ जो एमओयू के कारण आज 229 एंटिक्विटीज भारत आए। उसमें कुछ 25 चुनकर इस मीटिंग में भी हम प्रदर्शन का सभी डेलीगेट्स के लिए प्रदर्शन करने वाले हैं।
His view was echoed by his ministerial colleague Dr. Virendra Kumar.
जो हमारी प्राचीन मूर्तियां, उसमें खजुराहो की भी मूर्तियां हैं जो हमारे देश से चली गई थी। ऐसे वैश्विक स्तर पर एक दूसरे के साथ में जहां विचारों का आदान प्रदान करना, वहीं डिजिटल प्रौद्योगिकी का उपयोग करके इस तरह की मूर्तियों को वापस लाने में भी इस मंच के माध्यम से एक बहुत सशक्त भूमिका का निर्वाह होने वाला है।
Khajuraho MP spoke on enthusiastic public participation in a cleanliness campaign underway in the city Clean Khajuraho, Green Khajuraho.
माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी की हम सबको जो निर्देश था कि जहां पर मीटिंग हो रही है वहां जनता का इन्वॉल्वमेंट स्वच्छता के अभियान में, आने वाले लोगों को हम एक यहां के कल्चर के अनुरूप उनका स्वागत करें। तो इस दिशा में मैं बताना चाहता हूं कि 29 दिसंबर से लगातार इसकी हमने शुरुआत की थी कि क्लीन खजुराहो, ग्रीन खजुराहो। आज लगातार 55वां दिन यहां के सभी नागरिक, महिला, पुरुष, सामाजिक संस्थाएं, हमारे इमिनेंट पर्सन्स जो यहां पर हैं, प्रबुद्ध लोग हैं, उसमें पद्मश्री से लेकर के कई बड़े लोग उसमें सम्मिलित हुए।
Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Culture threw light on the significance of the Culture Working Group meeting.
Recently, culture has been declared as a global public good. So it is extremely important that culture be given its due place in a very important collective like the G20. Under the Indian presidency, we are trying to ensure that Culture Working Group leads to, the topics, the priorities that we discuss in the 4 Culture Working Group meetings. They lead to some very tangible and concrete outcomes, and they are able to contribute to the promotion of culture and situation of culture in the global politics.
The UNESCO representative at the meeting called upon the international community to harness the impact of culture as a global public good.
Culture is what defines us. It is our past, present and future, which we shape together. Culture is a force that connects us. Through culture, we appreciate and celebrate our heritage. This year, we join forces with India under its presidency of the G20 to promote culture in the global development agenda. The declaration adopted at the UNESCO World Conference on Cultural Policies and Sustainable Development, Mondiacult 2022, is clear. It is time to harness culture's impact as a global public good. Let us champion culture for sustainable development and the well-being of all towards 2030 and beyond.
At the heart of India's G20 culture track is the idea of culture for life, an environmentally conscious lifestyle as a campaign for sustainable living. India has identified 4 priority areas for the Culture Working Group: protection and restitution of cultural property, harnessing living heritage for a sustainable future, promotion of cultural and creative industries and creative economy, and leveraging digital technologies for protection and promotion of culture. An exhibition on return of treasures was inaugurated by the Culture Minister G. Kishan Reddy and the Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh Shivraj Singh Chauhan. Cultural programs are planned on the occasion, including the Khajuraho Dance Festival cultural performances. The delegates will also visit the Western Group of Temples, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. They will also be taken to Panna Tiger Reserve. The working group will evolve through 4 meetings in 4 historic cities of India. After the first one in Khajuraho, the next 2 will be organized in Bhubaneswar and Hampi, while the location of the 4th meeting is yet to be decided. The Culture Working Group meeting reflects the emergence of culture as a prominent theme on the global stage and will inform future global cultural policies and initiatives. The working group has developed a robust year-long program of cultural projects such as exhibitions, immersive experiences, symposiums, seminars, art residences, workshops, publications and more to take forward India's priorities in the cultural domain.
India is chairing G20 with the spirit of one earth, one family and one future. In this first Culture Working Group meeting, India will present their concept of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam to the delegates coming from G20 countries through its rich art and culture. With camera person Manudev Bharadwaj, Aditya Srivastav, DD India, Khajuraho.
On that note, we come to the close of this edition of India at G20. Thanks for watching.
It's another six.
रिचार्ज जल्दी रिचार्ज करा। ये क्या किया?
मैच तो गया।
पेमेंट कैसे करेंगे?
टोकनाइज कार्ड से। टोकन? हाँ, ऑनलाइन पेमेंट के लिए आरबीआई लाए हैं टोकनाइजेशन। एक बार कार्ड डिटेल्स, ओटीपी, सीवीवी डालकर टोकन जनरेट कीजिए। कार्ड भी सुरक्षित और बार-बार डिटेल्स भरने की नो झंझट। वही सुविधा अधिक सुरक्षित। ऑलराउंडर। वो की मैं। आरबीआई कहता है कि
जानकार बनिए,